They say you can hear arrogance before you see it. It sounds like a Lexus engine idling just long enough to be noticed. At 9:17 that morning, my shovel hit earth for the 12th time. When I heard it, the low hum, then the metallic wail of police sirens splitting the quiet air like a challenge. 3 squad cars tore into my driveway, gravel spraying my lawn in glittering arcs. I straightened up, sweat sliding down my spine, dirt streaked across my forearms. The morning had started as therapy. It was about to turn into a case study in abuse of power. The first door slammed, then another. The sound of boots on crushed stone. Officers in mirrored sunglasses approached the posture, the cautious spacing, the left hand grazing the taser as muscle memory. Behind them, standing by her spotless white Lexus, was the reason our neighborhood couldn't breathe. Cordelia Blackthorne, HOA president, self-appointed queen of Maplewood Estates, arms crossed, lips pursed, perfume sharp enough to kill mosquitoes from a mile away. She didn't smile. She smirked. The kind of smirk that said, "Today, you'll learn your place." Only problem, I'm not the student she thinks I am. I'm the municipal judge for Riverside County. 20 years of sorting fact from fiction, seeing liars squirm under oath, and knowing exactly what makes power abuse collapse paperwork. "Sir, step away from the fence tools," the lead officer said. His tone was professional, but behind his mirrored shades I could see confusion. He didn't expect this scene. A middle-aged man in work boots, cedar dust on his jeans, 3 squad cars for a fence. Cordelia was ready for her close-up. She held a clipboard like it was a sword. "This man is trespassing on HOA property," she declared, projecting her voice so the entire block could hear. "He's destroying community land." I set my shovel down slowly. "Community land?" I asked, wiping my palms on my jeans. "That's funny, because according to the county surveyor's office, every inch of this soil under my boots belongs to me." I reached into the back pocket of my work pants and pulled out the sealed survey folder. Thick paper, official watermark, GPS coordinates in black and white. I handed it to the sergeant, who raised an eyebrow. He glanced at Cordelia, then back at me. "Your name, sir? Harrison Webb?" The pause that followed was long enough for Cordelia to start fidgeting. "Your Honor," the officer finally said, his tone shifting. Cordelia froze. "Wait, what?" she stammered, color draining from her face. "Judge Harrison Webb," the sergeant repeated, tucking the folder under his arm. "Municipal court." For the first time since I'd moved here, Cordelia didn't know what to say. Her mouth opened, closed, then tried to find the arrogance she'd lost. "Well, that doesn't matter. He's still violating community." "Ma'am," the sergeant interrupted, "he's within his legal right to build this fence, and you actually are trespassing on his property." The silence that followed was heavy. The type you could frame. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Marcus from the 47 leaned against his fence with a smirk. Mrs. Chen froze mid-step with her mail, her eyes wide. Cordelia's heels punched into the soil as she turned, muttering something about aesthetic violations. She stormed back to her Lexus, each step less confident than the last. The officers nodded politely to me. "Have a good morning, Judge." And just like that, the sirens faded, leaving behind the sound of cicadas, the smell of hot earth, and the quiet knowledge that something big had just cracked open. Because the truth was simple. Cordelia wasn't just enforcing rules. She was running a business of fear. And now, she'd just called the cops on the one man who had the power and the patience to tear her entire empire apart. I looked down at my fence post, the sunlight catching the edge of my level. The bubble sat dead center. Perfect alignment. Funny thing about lines, once you learn how to draw them right, you also learn where they've been crossed. By the time I went inside and washed the dirt from my hands, the morning had already made the neighborhood group chat. "Judge Webb handcuffed the HOA president," one message said. "He's suing the board," said another. Gossip spreads faster than wildfire in a dry suburb. I let them talk. Let Cordelia stew. The real game wouldn't play out on Facebook. It would play out on paper budgets, ledgers, contracts. That's where the skeletons live. I sat at my kitchen table, the hum of the fridge the only sound. My phone buzzed a new email. Subject line, violation notice. It was time-stamped 9:52 a.m., less than 40 minutes after the police left. "The charge?" Unauthorized use of construction tools on HOA property. Fine, $250, escalating daily. I laughed. Out loud, because this was no longer about fences. This was war, quiet, procedural, and lethal if you didn't know how to fight it. Lucky for me, paperwork is my battlefield. Maplewood Estates had looked like paradise when I bought the house 6 months ago. White fences, manicured lawns, the kind of stillness that promises peace. I'd just finalized my divorce, needed space somewhere to rebuild myself after years of courtroom politics and the echo of an empty home. The property was perfect. Corner lot, giant backyard, and enough room for a workshop where I could turn wood instead of arguments. The brochure promised strong community management. I thought that meant order. Turns out it meant monarchy. Cordelia Blackthorne had been president for 8 years. 8 years too long for any HOA seat. I first met her the day I moved in. She appeared like she'd been waiting behind a curtain, clipboard already in hand. "We don't allow unapproved moving trucks overnight," she said instead of hello. Her hair was a weapon-sharp bob, silver highlights like battle scars. I remember thinking, this woman missed her calling. She should have been a dictator. It started small. A letter about my mailbox after it got smashed by a kid with a baseball bat. A fine for unsanctioned exterior repair. $150. I replaced the mailbox with an identical one. Same model. Same color. The next day, another letter. By the time I opened it, my neighbor Marcus had walked over, beer in hand. "Let me guess," he said, nodding toward the envelope. "Your first love letter from Queen Cordelia?" I laughed, but his face was serious. "Don't take her lightly. She plays chess while the rest of us are still reading the rules. You fight back, she doubles down. How long you lived here?" I asked. 6 years, he said. 3 violations, 2 appeals, 1 almost lawsuit. Lost a summer's worth of sanity. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the cul-de-sac. He told me about Mrs. Chen fined for decorative excess because she had 3 garden gnomes instead of 2. About the family at 134 who got warnings for hanging a flag on a wooden pole instead of metal. About the retired vet who was told to repaint his shed because it was 2 shades too dark for community tone. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" I asked. Marcus looked at me with tired eyes. "Because no one wants to be next." That's when I realized something chilling. Fear had become policy. The next week, I filed a formal request for HOA financial records, my legal right under Texas property law. Cordelia responded with a masterclass in evasion. Records being transferred, digitization delays, audit pending. Each reply perfectly crafted to sound official while saying absolutely nothing. So I did what I do best, read between the lines. Their posted budget listed nearly $400,000 in annual dues. But the amenities? Outdated pool, cracked tennis courts, community center ceiling with water stains shaped like maps of regret. Where was the money going? Then I saw it. Pinnacle Property Services, LLC. Landscaping, $89,000. Pool maintenance, $47,000. Both contracts signed by Cordelia Blackthorne and one Derek Blackthorne, her brother-in-law. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the numbers. I'd seen this pattern 100 times in municipal fraud cases. The trick wasn't genius, it was arrogance. Hide theft inside routine paperwork and count on apathy to be your accomplice. But Cordelia made one fatal error. She picked a fight with someone whose full-time job was exposing liars in suits. By Friday, I was ready for round 2. A standard 6-foot cedar fence, privacy, peace. And maybe, metaphorically, a line she couldn't cross. I filed the official HOA request form, paid the ridiculous $75 review fee, and waited. 30 days, 40, 47. Nothing. So that Saturday morning, when the Texas sun baked the grass into brittle straw, I grabbed my tools and started digging. The post-hole digger sliced into the earth with a satisfying rhythm. Chunk, chunk, chunk. The smell of cedar shavings and coffee drifted through the air. Marcus waved from across the yard, Mrs. Chen smiled, and for one blissful moment, I felt normal, free. Then the Lexus, white paint glinting like teeth, turning the corner slow and deliberate. Cordelia stepped out with a tape measure and a fury that could power a small city. "Stop right there!" she barked, marching across my lawn like she owned it. "You're extending onto HOA land." I turned, calm as a man reading Sunday news. "Actually," I said, handing her the survey report, "I'm 6 inches inside my line. GPS verified. County sealed." Her manicured fingers trembled slightly as she scanned the document. She pulled out her dollar store measuring tape, extended it, and squinted like she could outmeasure a satellite. "I don't care what your papers say," she snapped. "This violates community aesthetics. The HOA has rights. I could have argued. I didn't. I did what judges do: observe, record, and let the other side bury itself." When she dialed the police right there, pacing across my grass, screaming about trespassers on community land, I just kept working. Calm, steady, methodical. Every swing of my hammer was measured, every breath slow. Because one truth never changes: bullies always think volume is victory. But it's the quiet man with receipts who ends the story. 12 minutes later, sirens. 15 minutes later, her face turned ghost white when the sergeant called me Your Honor. And 30 minutes later, the entire neighborhood learned the golden rule of justice. Never pick a fight with someone who writes the laws you're trying to fake. That night, under the yellow glow of my kitchen lamp, I spread every piece of evidence across the table: violation letters, budgets, contract excerpts. It looked like a crime scene without the blood. But what struck me wasn't the paper, it was the pattern. Cordelia didn't target everyone. Only new homeowners, professionals, people who might actually ask for transparency. The type who read the fine print instead of signing and smiling, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't random. This was strategy. The fine notices weren't about enforcing order. They were about intimidation. Because intimidation leads to control, and control leads to money. And if there's one thing I've learned in 20 years of law, follow the money, and you'll find the rot. The fan hummed overhead. Outside, the crickets sang, unaware they lived in a battleground disguised as a neighborhood. I leaned back, looked at the flicker of my lamp, and whispered to no one in particular, "All right, Cordelia, you've had your court. Now let's have mine." The next morning, the neighborhood was too quiet. That kind of quiet that hums, like an engine cooling after being overworked. The sirens were gone, the dust had settled, but something had shifted. My fence stood halfway finished, posts straight as soldiers, each one like a warning sign to Cordelia. Boundaries, physical and legal, are real. When I walked outside with my coffee, Marcus was waiting on his porch, sunglasses low on his nose, a grin that carried more satisfaction than words. "You sure know how to start a weekend, Judge," he said, raising his mug. "Half the neighborhood's talking about how Cordelia almost fainted when the sergeant called you Your Honor." I smiled, but the victory felt thin. Because bullies don't stop when they're embarrassed. They double down when they're afraid. By noon, I had 3 new emails. Violation 271, unauthorized construction, $300 fine. Violation Dunsford 272. Improper waste disposal, $200 fine. Violation 273, unapproved yard sign. The last one made me laugh. The so-called yard sign was a small notice taped to my fence for the surveyor official documentation number, coordinates, date. That's the thing about tyrants. When they start losing power, they start rewriting definitions. I didn't respond, not yet. You don't interrupt your opponent when they're building your case for you. Instead, I poured another coffee, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. Years in municipal court had left me with a Rolodex of colleagues, prosecutors, auditors, and clerks who owed me small favors. I sent out polite inquiries, HOA filings, tax records, business license searches. I knew it would take days for anything official to return, but I wasn't planning to wait passively. That afternoon, I drove to the community center, the so-called HOA headquarters. The parking lot was mostly empty except for Cordelia's white Lexus parked diagonally across 2 spaces, as if even asphalt had to respect her authority. The blinds were half closed. I pushed the glass door open and stepped into a wave of artificial pine scent, trying and failing to cover the stale odor of mildew and arrogance. Cordelia was behind the desk, tapping at a laptop like she was managing an empire. She looked up slowly, smile tight as dental floss. "Judge Webb," she said, sugar sweet. "Here to pay your fines?" "I'm here for the records I requested last week," I replied. My voice even, my hands loose at my sides, she laughed one short, sharp note. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. But as I mentioned in my email, we're experiencing a digitization delay." I leaned slightly on the desk. "Is that before or after the files were burglarized?" Her eyes twitched. A small involuntary spasm that said he knows more than I thought. "Excuse me?" I smiled. "The sheriff's office has an open report about your filing room. Hard drives missing. No sign of forced entry. I read the report this morning." Her fingers stilled on the keyboard. "That information isn't public." "It is," I said quietly, "if you know where to look." The air between us tightened. Cordelia leaned back, folding her hands. "I hope you're not using your position to intimidate this board, Judge. That would be unprofessional." I met her eyes, steady. "I hope you're not using community funds to pay your brother-in-law's company, Ms. Blackthorne. That would be illegal." She blinked once, and for a brief moment I saw it. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. The kind people try to hide behind sarcasm and perfume. "Good afternoon," I said, turning toward the door. "Oh, and one more thing." She looked up sharply. "The police don't take kindly to false emergency calls. Next time you dial 911 for a property dispute, make sure you're standing on your own side of the grass." I didn't wait for a response. The door hissed shut behind me, and the sound felt like a gavel strike. That evening, I pulled into my driveway to find Marcus leaning against my fence, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. "She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon dipped in gasoline after you left," he said. "You hit a nerve." "She's hiding something," I replied. "Everybody knows that." "The question is what?" I opened my garage, revealing what was quickly turning into an evidence wall. Charts, maps, copies of CC&Rs, budget printouts of crime scene in spreadsheets. Marcus stepped inside and let out a low whistle. "Man, you're treating this like a federal investigation." "That's because it's about to become one." I pointed at the printout on the corkboard. "Pinnacle Property Services, LLC. Registered to Derek Blackthorne. P.O. Box in San Antonio, no physical office, no website. $89,000 paid for landscaping in a community where most of the grass was maintained by homeowners. $47,000 for pool maintenance on a pool that had been closed for repairs for 3 months. Marcus whistled again. "You think she's skimming?" "I think she's embezzling." He let that word hang in the air like smoke. The following week became a parade of harassment. Monday, unapproved garden plants. Tuesday, vehicle visibility issue. Wednesday, trash bins visible from the street. By Friday, my mailbox looked like a legal firework display, but Cordelia made one crucial mistake. She started overplaying her hand in public. That Friday, I was raking the side yard when I overheard her arguing with Eleanor Vance, the retired teacher who handled community events. Cordelia's voice carried down the sidewalk. "I don't care what he knows. He's bluffing. He can't touch us. He lives here. It's a conflict of interest." Eleanor's response was quieter but firm. "You're pushing too hard, Cordelia." "People are noticing," Cordelia snapped back. "People are sheep. They'll forget by next month." I smiled to myself, because every good prosecutor knows arrogance is the sound of a guilty conscience whistling in the dark. That night, the floodgates opened. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. nunilswillhelp@protonmail.com. No body text. Just an attachment. A scanned invoice. Pinnacle Property Services. Emergency pool repair dated February 17th. Amount $8,450, signed by Cordelia. But the kicker timestamp metadata showed it was created on February 22nd. 5 days after the repair supposedly happened. It was Digital Forgery 101. A sloppy one. I traced the IP. It came from a small cafe downtown. Public Wi-Fi. Impossible to prove who sent it, but it confirmed one thing. There were cracks in Cordelia's inner circle. Someone was leaking. I printed the invoice, slipped it into a red folder marked A1 Fraud, and stared at it for a long moment. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Cautious. Deliberate. When I opened the door, Derek Blackthorne stood there. Same last name. Different vibe. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, sweat on his temples, a crumpled polo shirt, eyes darting like he was expecting a sniper. "We need to talk," he said. We sat in my kitchen. He didn't touch his coffee. His hand shook slightly when he reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I didn't sign half those invoices," he said. "She forged them. She told me it was temporary, that it was just money moved around until her real estate business recovered." "Moved where?" I asked. He hesitated, then whispered, "Into her accounts. Sometimes mine, but the transfers always came from the HOA pool." "How long?" 3 years, he said, voice cracking. "It started small, but lately she's desperate. After the divorce, the housing market crash, she's drowning. And she's dragging everyone with her." I leaned back slowly. "Why come to me now?" "Because she's losing it," he said. "She thinks you're planning something big. She's trying to get you removed from the bench. She's telling the board you're abusing power." I smiled faintly. "Let her," he blinked. "You're not scared?" "Derek," I said, "I've spent 20 years watching liars implode in slow motion. She's not the first. She won't be the last. The only difference is this time I'm not behind the bench. I'm on the field." He slid the envelope toward me. Inside were copies of invoices, checks, payment records, even text screenshots, where Cordelia had ordered him to inflate materials cost by 200%. Evidence. Real, concrete, admissible evidence. "Will you testify?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "If it means protecting my kids from her mess, yes." I reached out a hand. "Then we're going to end this the right way." He shook it, and for the first time that night, he looked like a man who might actually sleep. 2 days later, I called Patricia Valdez, county prosecutor, former mentee. "Judge Webb," she said, amused. "Please tell me you're not calling because you got a speeding ticket." "Worse," I said. "An HOA," she laughed, then listened. And as I laid out the timeline, the invoices, the witness, her laughter faded. "Send me everything," she said, quietly. "Don't alert the board. Let me handle it from the inside." We set up encrypted transfers, a shared folder, secure notes. I didn't want a scandal. I wanted precision. That night, I stood by my unfinished fence under a moon that made the cedar glow silver. I thought about how this all started: one broken mailbox, one smug smile, one fake fine, and now I was watching a system unravel. Thread by thread, lie by lie. In the distance, I saw Cordelia's Lexus turn into her driveway. Headlights flashed across my yard. For a second, our eyes met through the shadows. She didn't wave. Neither did I. The war had started quietly. But the next phase wouldn't be quiet at all, because this time, it wouldn't be my phone ringing. It would be hers. By the end of that week, whispers had turned into static across Maplewood. A few brave residents started asking for their own copies of financial records. Cordelia's responses grew shorter, harsher, more erratic. She canceled 2 board meetings in a row, citing scheduling conflicts, but I knew what was really happening. She could feel the noose tightening not around her neck, but around her narrative. The Saturday after, I attended the HOA's open residence meeting. 30 people showed up the most in months. The air conditioning was broken, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees. Cordelia sat at the front, fanning herself with the agenda sheet. "We'll begin with community updates," she announced. Forcing a smile, I waited through 15 minutes of meaningless chatterpool filter replacements. Lawn care reminders until she tried to skip to adjournment. That's when I stood. "Point of order," I said calmly. Her smile froze. "Judge Webb, this isn't a courtroom." "No," I said. "But it's still a meeting bound by state open records law. And under Section 551.023, residents have the right to request discussion on any financial irregularities." Her hands clenched around her paper fan. "There are no irregularities." I stepped forward, handed copies of invoices to Eleanor and Bob. "Then you can explain why the same contractor billed this community $450 for pool repairs that never happened. And why the metadata shows the file was created 5 days after the supposed work date." The room fell silent. Bob's eyes widened. "Is this real?" Cordelia's voice cracked. "That's confidential, correction," I said softly. "It's public record. Paid with residents' money." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap, her expression tight. Cordelia, this says your brother-in-law owns the company. He's just a vendor, Cordelia stammered. A laugh rippled through the room, sharp, incredulous. For the first time, the Queen looked small. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anger ever could. Because the most powerful moment in any trial isn't the verdict. It's the silence that comes right before it, when the truth finally walks in and everyone realizes it's been there all along. That night, Cordelia sent me an email. Subject, you think you've won. Body, this isn't over. I have friends in high places. I smiled. Then I hit print, because threats on paper age beautifully in court. By Monday morning, Maplewood Estates wasn't the same neighborhood. The whisper network had turned electric. Driveway conversations stopped when cars passed. Blinds twitched open and shut. Everyone could feel it, something was about to break. Cordelia's emails had shifted tone overnight. Gone was the condescending charm. Now it was full-on panic, dressed as professionalism, capitalized words, passive-aggressive phrasing, vague reminders of conduct expectations. When tyrants sense they're losing control, they start writing like lawyers and talking like preachers. She called an emergency board meeting that Thursday night. I wasn't invited. That was fine. I knew how these things worked. Secrecy only meant fear, and fear meant mistakes. By 7:45 p.m., I sat in my garage-turned-war room, the faint hum of my desktop fan mixing with the low buzz of my audio monitor. Marcus had installed a small wireless microphone in the community center's hallway, nothing illegal, just a standard open-area recorder placed in plain sight near the bulletin board. It picked up sound through thin drywall, just enough to catch voices if anyone got too loud. And Cordelia was loud. Her voice came through the speaker, high-pitched, frantic, brittle like glass under pressure. I don't care what he's found, she snapped. He's using his position to intimidate this board. We'll file a complaint with the Judicial Review Panel. We'll make him look like a corrupt judge. Eleanor's voice cut in, steady but strained. Cordelia, he's not wrong. These invoices don't add up. You've been approving payments with no second signatures. That's standard procedure, Cordelia barked back. Bob's deep voice followed, nervous but deliberate. No, it's not. Our bylaws require dual authorization for expenditures over $5,000. Paper rustled, chairs scraped, voices overlapped. Then came the line that would end her career. Cordelia hissed, Do you think anyone's going to dig through 3 years of records? By the time they find out, I'll be in real estate full-time again. I hit pause. The sound of my own breath filled the silence. That single sentence, that arrogant admission, was enough to light up any prosecutor's eyes. I transferred the file, labeled it Exhibit D-17, and sent a copy to Patricia Valdez with a single note. And she just confessed to motive. 2 days later, Patricia called. You just handed me a gold mine, she said. Audio corroborates the invoices. We've got embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, possibly insurance fraud. Possibly? I asked. Definitely, she said. The HOA filed 3 separate insurance claims for landscaping damage last year. Payouts total $23,000. Same signatures, same contractor, your friend Pinnacle Property Services. No actual repair orders filed with the insurer. So, false claims, I said. Exactly. And get this, her brother-in-law's company deposited the payouts 3 days before the HOA reported the damage. It was textbook wire fraud. I'd seen small towns bury councilmen for less. Patricia's tone shifted. We're opening a federal referral, quietly, don't tip her off. Just keep being you, I smiled. Meaning? Meaning calm, polite, and terrifying. That weekend, the atmosphere in Maplewood was thick enough to taste. Neighbors started talking again softly at first, then louder, finding courage in shared frustration. People stopped fearing Cordelia's clipboard. They started ignoring her emails. Saturday morning, I was sanding a cedar beam in my workshop when I saw her Lexus drive past slower than usual. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The tension between us had become the new neighborhood weather. You didn't have to check the forecast. You just felt it. By evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Bob Morrison. Emergency board meeting, again. I can't take this anymore. She's losing it. Bring proof, I smiled faintly. Oh, Bob, I whispered. That's exactly what I planned to do. The meeting room looked like a bad remake of a courtroom. Folding chairs in crooked rows, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A dozen residents, each one pretending they weren't there for the drama, but secretly savoring every minute. Cordelia sat at the front, hands folded, jaw tight. When I walked in, her eyes narrowed, lips curling into that smile people wear right before they snap. Well, look who decided to join us, she said. I was beginning to think you'd resigned yourself to being a constant problem. I don't resign, I said, calm and even. I resolve, the room murmured. I laid a folder on the table thick, labeled neatly. Financial irregularities, preliminary findings. She tried to keep her voice level. Judge Webb, this isn't a courtroom. You can't just correct, I interrupted. But this is a homeowners meeting, which means it's governed by the Texas Property Code, and under Section 20905, all members have the right to examine association records. Bob nodded quietly. He's right. Cordelia's face flushed pink. This is harassment! No, I said. This is accountability. Then I slid the audio transcript across the table. Her own words, printed in black and white. By the time they find out, I'll be in real estate full-time again. The color drained from her face so fast it was like someone had unplugged her soul. The room erupted whispers, gasps, shifting chairs. Eleanor stood, voice trembling but firm. Cordelia, is this true? Cordelia stammered. That recording is fake. It's been manipulated. I pulled out a notarized certification from Patricia's office verifying the authenticity. It's been authenticated by the county prosecutor. The metadata matches the timestamp of your meeting. Cordelia's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, a silent fish drowning in truth. Board members, I said evenly, you each have a fiduciary duty to this community. I suggest you review your positions carefully. Anyone complicit in this scheme will be subject to both civil and criminal liability. Bob took off his glasses and rubbed his temples. Eleanor whispered a prayer. Cordelia stood, trembling. You think you can scare me? I have connections. I leaned forward slightly. Then you'll need all of them. I gathered my files, nodded once to the room, and left. Behind me, I heard the first voice say it out loud. She needs to step down. And just like that, the walls started to crumble. 2 nights later, Cordelia went nuclear. At exactly 10:04 p.m., a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, expression tight. Judge Webb, he said, you've been served. Restraining order again. This one thicker, more dramatic, claiming I was intimidating board members, abusing judicial authority, and creating a hostile living environment. Filed in neighboring Riverside County to avoid conflict of interest. Clever, desperate, predictable. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday morning. I'd seen enough of these to know it wasn't about winning. It was about intimidation making noise, forcing me to flinch, but I didn't flinch. I prepared. I laid out every piece of evidence, the emails, the invoices, the recording transcripts, Derek's statement. Patricia arranged for her office to quietly attend, observing the proceedings. When I walked into that courtroom, the air felt familiar. Cold, formal, steady, like slipping back into an old uniform. Cordelia was already there, flanked by an attorney who looked like he charged per heartbeat. Slick suit, polished shoes, expressionless eyes. He introduced himself as Bradley Kensington. He started strong. Your Honor, he said to Judge Henley, this man has been weaponizing his title to harass my client. He's gathering private information, intimidating volunteers, and leveraging his influence to destabilize an otherwise peaceful community. I sat silently. Let him perform. Let him paint his masterpiece of fiction. When he finished, I stood calm as a sunrise. Your Honor, I said, the evidence I have submitted demonstrates the opposite. My actions were those of a resident exercising legal rights under state code. I opened my folder, sliding exhibits forward one by one. Certified invoices, fraudulent payment trails, the recording transcript. Each page crisp, numbered, sourced. Judge Henley's brow furrowed deeper with every turn. When I finished, I said simply, "The only abuse of power here is by those who thought they could hide behind bureaucracy and paperwork. And as the evidence shows, they failed at both." Silence. Henley leaned forward. "Miss Blackthorne," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. "Do you have anything to add?" Cordelia shifted in her seat, eyes darting toward Kensington. He gave a small shake of his head. She swallowed. "No, Your Honor." Henley nodded once. Petition denied. Costs awarded to the respondent. The gavel fell with a crisp crack that echoed like thunder through the small courtroom. Cordelia didn't move. For a second, she looked smaller, like a balloon losing air. As I gathered my papers, I met her eyes. "This isn't personal," I said quietly. "It's just justice catching up." She turned away. By the next week, word had spread faster than a Texas wildfire. The court ruling hit the neighborhood Facebook page before I'd even driven home. Comments exploded, hundreds of them. Finally, someone stood up to her. She actually forged documents? Bless that man for keeping receipts. But beneath the relief was something more powerful courage. Neighbors who'd been silent for years started posting their own stories. Violations that never made sense, fines that seemed inflated, harassment patterns that matched mine like carbon copies. The dominoes had started to fall. Marcus called me that night, his voice full of energy. "Judge, it's happening. People are meeting. They want her gone. They're planning a recall vote." "Good," I said. "Keep it organized." "Keep it civil," he laughed. "Civil? In an HOA? That'll be a first." But he did it. Within a week, the petition had 84 signatures, more than enough to trigger a special election. Cordelia's iron grip had finally slipped. Meanwhile, Patricia's office was busy digging. She called one evening while I was repairing a hinge on my workbench. "You sitting down?" she asked. "I'm a judge," I said. "We're always sitting down." "Cute," she said. "We've traced $127,000 in embezzled funds. Direct transfers from HOA accounts to personal and business ones. Her brother-in-law's company was just a funnel." I exhaled slowly. "How soon?" "Soon," she said. "I've got a grand jury prepped. I'm just waiting for one more signature, the green light from the district's financial crimes unit." I smiled. "You're going to make her famous," Patricia laughed. "She'll wish she wasn't." The following Thursday, Cordelia held one last board meeting. Marcus texted me from inside. "She's cracking. Hands shaking. Keeps repeating that she's the victim." At 9:15 p.m., I heard tires screech outside my house, a thud. My mailbox, the third one I'd replaced since moving in, lay face down on the ground, splintered. I didn't get angry. I just walked inside, pulled the footage from my security camera, and smiled. Sandra Muller's teenage son. Hood up, spray paint in hand, caught in 4K. I forwarded it to Patricia, subject line, "Desperation looks good on camera." By Sunday morning, the neighborhood had transformed. The fear was gone. You could feel it in the way people waved again, in the way Mrs. Chen gardened without looking over her shoulder, in the way Marcus stood a little taller. The queen had lost her crown, and the kingdom had remembered it was never hers to begin with. But this wasn't over. Not yet, because when corruption falls, it doesn't fall quietly. It drags everything down with it. And the real collapse, the televised, federal, irreversible kind, was just days away. Tuesday morning started like any other Texas dawn, sunlight slicing through the blinds, the faint hum of sprinklers, the smell of cedar still clinging to my hands. Then my phone buzzed twice. Patricia Valdez. No greeting, no preamble, just 3 words that hit harder than caffeine. It's happening today. The grand jury had returned a true bill. 14 counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion. Cordelia Blackthorne, president of Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association, was now a federal defendant. For 20 minutes I sat there, listening to the quiet creak of my house, the ordinary sounds of life carrying on outside. Kids on bikes, dogs barking. No one knew that by noon our HOA's entire executive board would be in handcuffs. At 11:07 a.m., sirens again broke the peace, but this time they weren't for me. Through the curtain, I watched two black SUVs roll past my driveway toward the community center. FBI emblems on the doors, agents in Navy windbreakers stepping out with clipboards and purpose. Across the street, Marcus emerged from his garage, phone already recording. "Showtime," he murmured. Cordelia's Lexus was already there, parked crooked as ever. I saw her step out when the agents approached. For a moment, she tried to smile, habit, maybe muscle memory from years of false control. Then they spoke to her. Whatever they said stole the air from her lungs. Her knees buckled. Click. The sound of handcuffs, soft metal, decisive, final. Sandra Mueller arrived 10 minutes later, hysterical, hair half up, half out. Frank Delacroix was escorted from the side door with his tie crooked and eyes down. Eleanor Vance watched from her car, crying silently, a mixture of relief and betrayal. And somewhere in that chaos, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: silence inside my chest. The kind that comes only after truth finally arrives. By evening, news trucks lined our streets. Channel 7's Jennifer Kim was there in person, hair perfect, voice sharp, eyes gleaming with the kind of energy journalists get when the story of the year lands on their doorstep. "Federal agents executed warrants today in Riverside County," she said into the camera. Sources confirm a months-long investigation into alleged HOA embezzlement culminated in multiple arrests. Neighbors stood on their lawns like spectators at a parade no one asked for, but everyone needed. Children whispered. Mrs. Chen held my arm and said, "Maybe now we can plant without permission." The indictment was public by nightfall. I read it in my workshop, light flickering off fresh cedar planks. Each count read like a receipt for every humiliation she had inflicted on us. Every fine, every threat, every letter. Now it was her turn to face numbers she couldn't erase. Wire fraud in violation of 18. USC Paragraph 343. Conspiracy to commit embezzlement under 18 USC Paragraph 371. Falsification of insurance records. I closed the document and let out a breath that felt like it had waited months to escape. 3 days later, the recall election was announced. No more secrecy, no more closed-door meetings. Every resident had a ballot. Every signature counted. The community center was transformed. Banners hung where violations used to be posted. Tables lined with clipboards and pens instead of threat letters. Marcus set up a grill outside for the volunteers. Earl the veteran handled security, clipboard in hand like a drill sergeant running logistics. Mrs. Chen arranged flowers along the windowsills. The scent of jasmine floated through the room. The same scent that had greeted me the first day I moved here, except this time it smelled like freedom. I watched people file in, neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years. They smiled. They laughed. They filled out ballots with steady hands. And in that moment, I realized something simple and beautiful. Justice isn't loud. It's people doing the right thing when no one's forcing them to. When the final count was read, the room erupted. 122 votes for reform, 9 against, 16 abstained. Cordelia's era was over, but the story didn't end there. Corruption rarely dies quietly. It thrashes on its way down, dragging everything it can reach. 2 nights after the vote, I found an anonymous note slid under my door. Blocky letters, cheap ink, smudged edges. "You don't know what she's capable of." I folded it, put it in a Ziploc bag, and filed it under evidence. Threats mean fear. Fear means they're out of moves. Sure enough, by Friday night, news broke that Cordelia had tried to withdraw cash from a frozen account and book a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. She was arrested at the airport with $47,000 in a duffel bag and a passport stamped for departure. When agents searched her car, they found forged deeds, a flash drive labeled HOA records, and a bottle of perfume named Victory. The irony was biblical. The headline the next morning read, "HOA president arrested in federal fraud case." It hit national feeds within hours. Good Morning America, USA Today, even a mention on CNN. A suburban scandal too perfect to ignore. I did my best to stay quiet. But when reporters camped outside my fence for 3 days, I finally stepped out. One of them, a young man with a press badge that still looked laminated by hand, asked, "Judge Webb, what's your reaction to the arrest?" I thought for a moment, then said, "The law isn't revenge. It's balance." And for a long time, this community was tilted. Today, it found its center again. He scribbled it down like scripture. Weeks passed, and the case snowballed. Every day brought a new headline, a new revelation. Turns out, Cordelia had been running a personal piggy bank through the HOA for years, claiming storm damage that never happened, pocketing insurance payouts, and laundering money through her brother-in-law's fake contracts. Patricia kept me updated in quiet calls. She was preparing for trial, lining up witnesses, and finalizing asset forfeiture documents to return funds to residents. "You realize," she said one night, "this case is going to set a precedent. We're calling it the Maplewood model." I laughed. "Sounds catchy. Just don't put my face on a billboard." "No promises," she said. By the time the trial began, spring had arrived. Maplewood's lawns were greener than they had been in years, and the air smelled of cut grass and closure. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters. Cordelia walked in wearing a navy blazer and handcuffs that flashed under the morning sun. Her lawyer, Bradley Kensington, looked 10 years older. Inside, the jury listened to 3 weeks of testimony. Derek Blackthorne spoke first. His voice cracked as he read his statement. He admitted his part, confessed to falsifying invoices under pressure, and explained how Cordelia had threatened his family when he tried to stop. Mrs. Chen testified about years of harassment, tears rolling down her cheeks as she described the fear of stepping into her own garden. Marcus talked about the constant violations, the late-night letters, the humiliation. Then Patricia took the floor, presenting evidence with the precision of a surgeon. Bank records, emails, insurance payouts, the audio recording. It wasn't a trial. It was a dissection. Every lie peeled back to reveal another. Cordelia took the stand on the 10th day. Her voice was flat, her confidence gone. She tried to cry once, but even the tears looked staged. When Patricia asked, "Did you authorize these payments?" Cordelia answered, "I don't recall." Patricia held up a check with Cordelia's signature on it. "Then let me refresh your memory." The jury didn't take long. 6 hours. Guilty on 12 of 14 counts. When the judge read the verdict, Cordelia closed her eyes and whispered something I couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just the sound of a crown falling. 4 years in federal prison. $180,000 in restitution. Permanent revocation of her real estate license. Community service upon release. The gavel fell and the room exhaled. Outside, the sun hit the courthouse windows and reflected down onto the crowd like liquid gold. Neighbors cheered. Reporters shouted questions. Patricia smiled for the first time in weeks. Jennifer Kim held a microphone to my face. "Judge Webb, what would you say to other homeowners dealing with corruption like this?" I looked straight into the camera. "Document everything. Know your rights. Never let bullies win through intimidation. Democracy works when good people refuse to stay silent." The crowd applauded. For once, it wasn't for a sentence or a verdict. It was for each other. That night, the new board met for the first time. Marcus was treasurer. Mrs. Chen handled community outreach. Earl ran maintenance with military efficiency. Bob served as secretary, this time by choice instead of fear. And me? I accepted the role of interim president not because I wanted power, but because I owed this place a steady hand. We passed our first motion unanimously, all financial records to be published online monthly. Second motion, competitive bidding for every contract. Third, a resident appeals committee so no one could ever be fined without a fair hearing. When we adjourned, Marcus grinned. "So, Judge, does this mean we finally get to fix the pool?" I laughed. "Yeah, Marcus. And this time, the invoice will be real." Outside, the night was warm and still. The fence I built months ago stood solid under the moonlight, each post a reminder of where it all started. Lines in the ground. Boundaries that meant freedom. But I knew this was bigger than Maplewood. Patricia's office was already fielding calls from other counties, asking about reform. Lawmakers wanted to study our model. Communities were starting to believe they could fight back, too.